Thousands of years ago, on the fertile plains of Anatolia, a great civilization appeared and left its mark on the whole region and dominated its times. This was the civilization of the Hittites, who had their capital city at Hattusha. This is the story of the Hittites in Hattusha, and of a culture that was vanquished and burned, but that rose again from the ashes. The names of the people and places in this story are real. The only points that are unclear in our tale are those that the contemporary histories of foreigners conceal because of their jealousy of this amazing civilization. These gaps have been filled in a fictional style that fits Hittite culture.
Hititlerin Anadolu toprakları üzerindeki öyküsü günümüzden yaklaşık 4000 yıl kadar önce.
The history of the Hittites in Anatolia began approximately 4,000 years ago.
Kızılırmağın kucakladığı topraklar.
Their roots were in Eurasia, and they settled in the area bounded by the Kızılırmak River. The whole region, including central and eastern Anatolia, were then called the lands of the Hatti.
Hangi yolu izleyerek geldikleri bugün hala.
The route that the Hittites took to their new lands is still a matter for discussion. Some say they came from the west and passed through the Thrace and across the Bosphorus. Others say they came from the east down through Caucasia.
Ve büyük bir imparatorluğun temellerinin atılacağı.
They then founded a city called Kushara, which became the heart of a great empire. Unfortunately, the exact location of Kushara is unknown. The first king of the Hittites, Pitana, moved to widen the borders of his kingdom, capturing Nesha, the richest city of the Hatti country. Nesha had been one of the most important Assyrian cities, helping to monopolize the trade between Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Pitana died soon after he declared his son Anitta as heir apparent. After ascending the throne, Anitta won greater victories than those of his father, and these events were recorded on a clay tablet, which has become known as the Anitta text, the oldest surviving Hittite document. It is this tablet that tells the sad tale of a city that wouldn't submit to Anitta, a city paid a very heavy price for its defiance, Hattusha.
Anitta'ya boyun eğmeyip meydan okuyan ve bu meydan okumayı çok ağır bir bedelle ödeyen bir kentin öyküsü. Hattuşa'nın öyküsü.
Hattusha is reborn from the ashes.
At that time, a great starvation fell upon Hattusha, and our god Siu handed it to the god of Halmashuita. Then I captured Hattusha in a night attack, and I planted wild grass in its place. If any king after me rebuilds Hattusha, the curse of the storm god of the sky shall be upon him.
Hattusha, once a city of dreams, now suffered the fire of a black curse. For King Anitta had challenged the civic dead. Anitta had dreamed of capturing the city and adding another tally to his victories, but Hattusha raised such resistance that the siege held for months. The spoils Anitta and his soldiers had dreamt of vanished, and when they at last entered the city, they found it completely empty. There were no idols in the temples and no grain in the storehouses, and by such defiance, Hattusha signed its own death warrant as the king ordered the burning and razing of Hattusha. Anitta turned his back on the city as it burned and ordered that its ashes be thrown in the air and its sites cursed. He then made the rich city of Neshar the capital of Hittites. And so, by these methods, Anitta constructed the strongest kingdom in the Hatti country, although it didn't last long. After the death of Anitta, the kingdom quickly declined, and Hattusha bided its time and then rose again from the ashes scattered over the fertile plain. When a king with claims of descent from Anitta appeared 100 years later, in 1650 BCE, he not only challenged the curse, he even took the name Hattushili, meaning one from Hattusha. King Hattushili stirred Hattusha from its centuries-deep old sleep, and the city rose again on the wild grass that Anitta had planted. Hattushili I built his palace on a hill, surrounded by turreted walls and fringed by a steep rock, a place the people called the Great Fortress. The palace had just one entrance, and the sentinels received orders to search everyone entering, even the king's son. The palace was well protected and housed the archive of the kingdom. Kingdom's central temple, offices, state reception rooms, and storehouses, all centered on a common courtyard. The people of the city were gathered in houses around the city walls, and as the population grew, these houses were also surrounded by walls. Architecturally, ordinary houses were in the same style as the royal palace. Their foundations were stone, walls were made of sun-dried bricks, and the flat roofs stood on wooden footings. Hittite houses had few rooms, but contained kilns and even bathtubs. The new capital had no water problems, as a small river ran through the city and formed an important water source for the Hattusians. And Hittite women were able to carry clean water home from street fountains. Wastewater was carried out of the city by canals below the streets. New temples were built to one side of the city, in the same style as the houses of the city. Sacrifices were frequently made to mollify the gods. The most imposing of these temples was the Great Temple, which was also an important economic center and was surrounded by a 200-roomed store housing oil, wine, and grain in big jars. The temple also held an archive housing important clay tablets inscribed with state records. The sanctuary of the Great Temple was reached by passing through these buildings and entering an incense-filled courtyard that rang with the sound of hymns. The cult rooms faced the courtyard and contained idols of the storm god and the sun god, and 208 temple officials were worked and lived in the great temple complex to serve these gods. Their duties included washing and perfuming the idols, offering sacrifices to them, feeding them, entertaining them with music and song, and even putting them to bed for a good rest. It was believed that in return for these services, the gods would prolong the life of the Hittite nation. The Splendid Capital was created to influence anybody who saw it. Hattusha had 6-kilometer-long walls and looked impregnable. To add to this feeling of strength, it was proclaimed that Hattusha was protected by the storm god. Hattusili I also ordered a play performed which showed his invincibility. In the play, people waited in excitement around the year Kapi, a passage influenced by the pyramids of Egypt. An actor then came on stage wearing the costume of the storm god and had a merciless struggle with some monks whom he defeated. One of the beaten monks subsequently stood up, turned to the king, and said,
Worry not. Conquests will always be yours. The storm god will lay your enemies beneath your feet, and you will smash them as if they were empty pots.
And it seems the storm god did lay his enemies under the feet of King Hattusili, as he expanded his lands and welded stronger a state, as his military expeditions achieved victory after victory. Hattusili I's biggest ambition was the capture of Halep, the richest and strongest city of the region. Capturing Halep would extend the Hittite lands to the borders of Mesopotamia and open it to new cultures and trade routes. However, the dream of Halep would lead King Hattusili to his own death. In an attack on the city, Hattusili was mortally wounded and retreated to his capital at Hattusha, burdened with the pain of not conquering Halep. As he lay on his deathbed, his children began to quarrel over the kingdom. Learning of this, the king grew angry and elected to put his grandson, Musili, on the throne in order to punish his sons. In preparing his testament, the king wasn't able to completely act alone. He had to secure the approval of the council known as the Panku, which was composed of nobles and acted as a senate. This governmental structure leads many historians to consider the Hittite state to be the first constitutional kingdom in the world. King Hattusili I summoned a meeting of the Panku at his sickbed and proclaimed his testament in their presence.
Look, I'm unwell. My son should ascend the throne after me. I hugged and raised him, but he didn't shed tears and showed no mercy. He didn't listen to the words of the king nor his mother. He listened the words of a snake, and his brothers carried words to him that broke our relationship. I know this. So, I am declaring a war against war. Enough is enough. From now on, he's not my son. Listen to me very carefully. From now on, Musili is my son, and you will respect him as king. You will enthrone him, as God only gives the place of a lion to another lion. Musili, you will eat your father's bread and drink his water, as long as you take his advice. And you, the members of the Panku, my highest officials, you will eat my bread and drink my water, as long as you do what I say so, that Hattusha will flourish and my country will live in peace and serenity. Musili, they should read this tablet to you every month, so that you will carry my words and experience in your heart. My son, listen to all the words I've put in your heart and respect them. My dear woman Hashtayar, wash my dead body as it should be done. Hug me well and protect me from the earth by holding me to your chest.
1. Hattuşili'nin dokunaklı bir anlatımla kaydettirdiği bu tablet,
This text, dictated by Hattushili I, using such soul-stirring expressions, is regarded as the first written testament in history. Hattushili left us a priceless document, and archaeologists and Hittitologists place great value in it. Thanks to the tablet, much important information about the Hittites became clear. The words, "You will eat bread and drink water," in the testaments of Hattushili were the first Hittite words to be translated by scholars. And the most interesting word in the phrase was the Hittite word watar, which means water, because watar is also close to the words for water in English and German. It was determined that Hittite was an Indo-European language. Mushili I expanded his realm into Mesopotamia, crossing the Euphrates and conquering Babylon, which was one of the most important cities of the whole Middle East and highly cultured. Mushili's victory ended the centuries-old rule of the Hammurabi dynasty over Babylon. He then returned to Hattusha, carrying with him the spoils of conquest and unaware of the treacherous trap being laid for him. Soon after his return, Mushili was killed by Hantili, his brother-in-law, and so began a period of 65 years of regicide and intrigue in the Hittite kingdom. The price paid for this lust of power was great, and the Hittites quickly lost the land that their ancestors had won, and the power of state declined until the accession of Telipinu, who had taken the name of a Hatti god.
Tahta geçinceye kadar.
Legally enlightened Hattusha.
The Hittites believed that the god Telipinu was the source of all life, and this belief meant that they were very afraid of the wrath of Telipinu. According to the legend, the god would abandon the country if he became enraged, taking its fruitfulness with him. Only if the god returned and forgave the population would nature be revived. King Telipinu, like his divine namesake, wanted to revive the devastated and much reduced Hittite nation. To this end, he summoned the Panku and proclaimed a new law aimed at stopping the spilling of blood in fraternal disputes.
Blood feuds in the royal family have increased, and the people of Hattusha are unhappy with this. As a result, I called a council and issued this edict. From this day forward, no man shall harm a son of the royal house, and no man shall draw a weapon upon him. The firstborn son of the king's senior woman shall inherit the crown. And if there is no son from the senior woman, then the son of the second woman shall inherit. If there are no sons at all, then the husband of the first daughter of the senior woman shall inherit.
King Telipinu then ordered that all Hittite laws were to be revised under the promulgation of the laws of succession. The Panku members immediately gathered and revised them.
If a man saws another man's field, he shall find a plow around his neck. 2 draft oxen shall then be hitched to the plow, with one facing one way, the other facing in the opposite direction. The man shall die, the oxen shall be slaughtered, and the field shall be returned to its owner. This is the way that things were done until this day. From this day, if a man saws another man's field, a sheep shall be killed in his stead, and 2 sheep slaughtered in the place of the oxen. The men shall then give 30 loaves of bread and 3 pots of good beer to the owner of the field, and the owner of the field shall reap the crop.
In Hittite law, there was a very important distinction between a crime committed with intent and one committed by accident. If a Hittite intentionally committed a crime, he received severe punishment, but if the crime was accidental, the punishment was reduced. Although rare, there were, however, crimes that Hittite law punished by death. A person who stole a bronze lance from the palace, who had sexual intercourse with his daughter or sister, or a man who kidnapped a woman and carried her into the mountains, paid for their crimes with their heads. In comparison with the Hammurabi and Assyrian legal systems of the time, Hittite law was both more humane and just. The merciless Hammurabi legal ethos of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth never found a place in Hittite law. The Hittites brought no evidence with them of their origins when they came to Anatolia. The people of this vital civilization merely adapted to the culture of the lands in which they settled and strengthened their hybrid culture by accepting local festivals and gods. It was thanks to the Hittites that Anatolia received a fairly just legal system and government based on the senatorial system of the Panku. The dark, intolerant face of the region received a ray of light with the arrival of the Hittites. But this light never shone into the dark pit of palace politics. King Telepinu's law of succession was violated by those whose passion for power was greater than their respect for the law. And the Hittites again entered a long period of uncertainty, stained with blood feuds and loss of empire.
Hattusha, capital of the empire.
When King Shupiluluma came to the throne, he swore to expand the Hittite state into an empire, and he immediately began to prepare his army for the Great Hittite Campaign. Again, it was time to revive the Hittite realm, but King Shupiluluma first had to bring his neighbors to heel. The same neighbors who had backstabbed the Hittites in the past. He bound the once strong kingdoms of Kisuvatna and Mitanni to him by treaty, and then he reconquered Halep and Syria. However, in conquering Syria, the Hittites acquired a new enemy, the greatest power of the East, Egypt. And in his drive to succeed, the king persisted in his expansion, completely ignoring the restive lion of the Nile. Shupiluluma, who was skilled in diplomacy, needed allies, and to this end, he married the daughter of the Babylonian king and built an alliance. The Anundic vase, made at least 3,600 years ago, depicts a Hittite wedding ceremony. The pictured guests and gods are enjoying themselves as musicians play the lyre, another stringed instrument, and the castanets. The banquet that the guests are eating is being served by chefs and wine waiters, and the bridegroom is opening the bride's veil as the holy union is blessed by the presence of gods. King Shupiluluma managed to get neighboring states, in some cases by war regiments, and sometimes by wedding ceremonies. Now he was able to set south for the Great Hittite Campaign. Shupiluluma, who even managed to make the strong Mitanni state subservient, also conquered Kargamish. So, the Hittites captured the whole of Syria. The Hittite state was rescued from the clutches of a dam nearly 300 years ago, and now it was a big empire.
The sad story of a king.
King Shuppiluliuma didn't harm the people of any country that he conquered. He merely dethroned their kings and installed new kings who swore allegiance to him. Normally, he gave the biggest and strongest kingdoms to his sons. Countries that were subject to the Hittite Empire had to pay tribute to the king every year and had to raise soldiers for the Hittite wars. The Hittite Empire was now so powerful that only one serious enemy was left, Egypt. But at this point, King Shuppiluliuma wasn't able to risk a war with Egypt. After some time, a strange event occurred and the Egyptians sent an embassy to Shuppiluliuma. The intrigues and murders which had so plagued the Hittite royal house were now afflicting the Egyptians. The 18-year-old pharaoh Tutankhamun had been murdered, and his widow wished to marry one of Shuppiluliuma's sons. So the blood feuds of Egypt were aiding the Hittite cause, and a Hittite prince would become pharaoh. King Shuppiluliuma sent his son to Egypt with a magnificent wedding train, but bad news quickly reached Hattusha. The bridegroom had been killed by the murderers of Tutankhamun. King Shuppiluliuma, having lost his son while trying to build an alliance with Egypt, attacked Egypt with the rage of a wounded lion. But the campaign came to an early end in Syria when the king fell victim to plague. In his last minutes, Shuppiluliuma asked his sons to avenge the death of their brother. Then he died in pain, leaving a vast, rich empire. His sons, in tears, anointed the body of their father with holy oil, pressed him to their chests, and bade him farewell. The body of the king was then carried on the shoulders of his sons to a holy field to be cremated. Unlike the Egyptian pharaohs, the Hittite kings never deified themselves and only became gods after death. Believing that the body of a dead king should be protected from the earth because the underworld was totally dark, and souls sent to the underworld ate and drank mud, Hittite kings were always cremated after death, so that the smoke rose into the sky where the nation's patron, the storm god, awaited the soul of Shuppiluliuma. The funeral ceremonies began with the wailing hymns of women. Then the high priest of the great temple offered prayers while leading a sacrificial goat around the body of the king. Finally, accompanied by hymns and prayers, the body of the king was burnt on a pyre, and once the soul of the king had risen to heaven, female servants put out the fire with wine and beer. The bones of the king were then placed in a silver pot filled with holy oil and bread, sanctified by the ashes of Shuppiluliuma, were then distributed to servants. The ceremony ended with the drinking of 3 glasses of wine in honor of the soul of the king. The people of Hattusha grieved deeply for their king. Now bigger catastrophes awaited them. the plague hovered over Hattusha like a black cloud, and fires and lamentations arose from every corner of the city. The merciless disease afflicted Hattusha for nearly 20 years, and the new king, Murshili, lost his brother to the same disease that had felled his father. Unable to deal with the events, Murshili secluded himself in a temple and prayed to the gods who had cursed him and Hattusha.
O storm god of the Hatti, my lord, and all gods who are my lords. It's true that humans commit sins. My father committed sins and didn't heed the words of the storm god. But I haven't sinned. It's true that the sins of the fathers passed to the son. My father's sins have passed to me, and I now accept them. O storm god of the Hatti, O all gods who are my lords, feel compassion for us, be mild. Drive away the plague that has killed so many people in the Hatti lands. O you gods, I sacrifice animals to you in order to save my country from the plague. Nobody will be able to sacrifice to you if we're all dead. Take this pain from my heart and remove this fear from my soul.
Babasını ve kardeşini vebaya kurban veren ikinci Murşili'ye tanrılar acıdı.
In seeming response to prayer, the black clouds over the country began to lift, and Murshili appeared to have beaten both the plague and the enemies who had tried to attack the Hittites at this time of weakness.
Hititlerin asıl büyük
His
düşmanları
son,
olan
Muwattali II, then inherited the task of tackling the great enemy that was Egypt.
Ramses'in Kadeş'e saldıracağını öğrenen ikinci
Upon
Muwattali,
learning that Ramses was planning to attack Kadesh, Muwattali II moved his capital from Hattusha to Tarhuntasha and prepared his army.
eli silah tutan bütün Hitit erkeklerinin
All Hittite men old enough to be drafted had to leave their workshops and fields.
Hattusa'da her yıl baharla birlikte savaş
The war horns were sounded, and the army started their
Bu
campaign.
sefer Hititlerin şimdiye kadar
Muwattali and his army moved to Kadesh to face Ramses II.
Kadeş'e doğru yola çıktığını öğrenen Muwattali, ordusunun başında Kadeş'e doğru harekete geçti.
Before setting out to war, King Muwattali prayed to the storm god for victory and blessed his commanders in their preparations. On a warm spring early morning, and carrying the symbolic royal scepter and his sword in his hands, Muwattali rode out at the head of his army with his son Uriteshub and his brother at his side. The Hittite army, which consisted of 3,500 war chariots and 17,000 soldiers, marched out from Tarhuntasha and after a long trek reached the fortress of Kadesh, which was seen looming through the mist. Muvateli settled into the fortress and waited for the Egyptian army under Ramses to arrive in the last days of spring, when finally Ramses and his army were spotted near the Orontes River. The Egyptian army, which struck terror and trembling into the hearts of the world, was smaller than that of the Hittites, 20,000 Egyptians versus 30,000 Hittites. Unaware of the size of Muvateli's force, Ramses ordered the attack. The Hittite chariots, with 3 men mounted on each, and whose fame had spread over the years, drove towards the Egyptian army, raising a cloud of dust. The 3 charioteers had strict tasks. One drove, the second continuously fired arrows, and the third protected the other 2 with his shield. Ramses was quickly surrounded and withdrew, and Muvateli instantly became a legend. The Hittite king who defeated the great Egyptian army and the Kadesh War was recorded as the most important tactical war of the time. King Muvateli II returned to Tahuntasha filled with the joy of his glorious victory. And his new capital celebrated the victory for months. This was the first time for centuries that a victory had not been celebrated in Hattusha. After the death of Muvateli, his brother came to the throne as King Hattushili III and moved the capital back to Hattusha. The new King Hattushili had violated the Telepinu laws and had taken the throne from Muvateli's son by convincing everyone that it was both the wish of the gods and best for the country. He then sent his nephew, Uriteshub, into exile. Hattushili III was married to Puduhepa, the daughter of a priest of Huri origin. The Hittites had absorbed many of the customs of the Huri, and even the gods had Huri names. Queen Puduhepa was equal in authority to Hattushili, and she wanted good relations with Egypt, so as to be strong against the growing power of their common Assyrian enemies. Hattushili III sent envoys to Egypt to show his good intentions. And Queen Puduhepa began a correspondence with Ramses II that played a major role in the development of close relations between the 2 countries. "15 years after the Kadesh War, Hattushili III and Ramses II signed a peace treaty which stressed non-aggression and mutual defense in the face of an enemy attack. This Kadesh Treaty is thought to be the first written pact between nations. The political victory of Hattushili III brought peace to the country, and the economy revived as the threat of war retreated. Although Hattusha had a population of 30,000, the economy was agriculturally based, and the fertile land grew a wide variety of produce, from grapes to pomegranates, and from figs to olives. The prices at which peasants sold their produce were regulated by law. A sheep was worth 1 shekel, 8 grams of silver, and the most expensive animal was a draft horse at 20 shekels. At this time, the number of animals was a measure of the wealth of a country, and the victories of the Hittite kings added to the riches, which were recorded on the state tablets with pride. The successes of Hattushili III meant that the country was living in its richest and brightest period. To celebrate this largesse, Hattusili and Puddaheppa decided to build a temple of thanksgiving to honor the gods who had so blessed them. The open-air temple was built 2 kilometers outside Hattusha and was dedicated to all the Hittite gods. The sacred place was called Yazilikaya and was fronted by buildings for temple officials. Passing these buildings, you reached the Holy of Holies, where the Hittite stonemasons had created a masterpiece, carving images of the gods and goddesses in human form, meeting the storm god and sun god into huge slabs. The relief shows a ceremony of sacrifice in which 63 Hittite gods are brought together in a splendid parade. One day at Yazilikaya, by order of King Hattusili, a sacrifice was made to sanctify the gods. The king and queen wore ritual robes as they entered the temple to the accompaniment of hymns. They washed their hands in holy water in the courtyard and then took their places before the gods. King Hattusili, dividing a loaf of bread in 3, poured oil and honey on the bread. Then the cooks brought forth the sacrificial meat, and the king prayed to the gods for fruitfulness and long life for the country. Hattusili III died soon after this ceremony and left behind a marvelous capital that was remembered as the city of 1,000 gods.
The Curse of Anitta strikes.
Tutalia IV, the son of Hattusili III, ascended the throne despite Hittite law, which gave the crown to Kurunta, Uriteshub's brother. Afraid of a struggle for the kingdom, Tutalia proposed a deal to Kurunta. Kurunta would become king of Tahuntasha and Tutalia would keep Hattusha. The agreement was made and written in cuneiform on a bronze tablet. As was the custom, it ended with a curse.
Kurunta, should you ever violate this contract and attempt to ascend the throne of Hatti country, the witnessing gods will kill you and all your race.
But Tutalia IV had forgotten that he and Kurunta were from the same race. Years later, Kurunta duly violated the contract and captured the kingdom of the Hittites in Hatti country. The witnessing gods then damned the race of Kurunta, the Hittites. Catastrophe followed catastrophe, carrying the Hittites to destruction. When the people of Hattusha grew old, waiting for the end of a drought, the king ordered that the year's crops be put into the hundreds of granaries that surrounded the great temple. The Hittites remembered that their ancestors had left their homes for Anatolia because of drought, and they feared losing their new land through drought. They particularly tried to protect their capital. Unfortunately, in spite of all the supplications to the gods, the drought didn't break and the rain never came. Soon, not a single grain of wheat was left in Hattusha's granaries, and the Hittite king was so desperate that he requested food aid from Egypt. This was a huge come down for the Hittite Empire, and lost prestige and power. Their enemies, who had waited for ages for this opportunity, attacked every frontier. Pirates and invaders came from far away to destroy everything in Anatolia, and this secured the end of the Hittites and the rise of the Kashgar, their old enemies to the north. Hattusha was razed to the ground. The cries of the people of Hattusha rose against a sea of flames. Thus the Hittites lost the land that had been their home for over 450 years. And as they remembered the curse of Anitta, the ashes of Hattusha were again thrown eternally to the winds.